Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Good to be here, and we're still heading strong. Month of February.
So with February comes a lot of crazy weather. We get really nice days, we get really nasty days, and everything in between. So, of course, it is the great time to talk about frost seeding. So we have brought a special guest today, Dr. Edward Rayburn from WVU Extension, and thanks for joining us on the show.
Great to be here, Karen. Thank you for the invite.
We are very happy to have you. Frost seeding is step farms can do to help improve the health of their pastures and the forage out there, right?
That's correct. And this year, with the price of nitrogen fertilizer, I think it's critical that farmers enjoy the benefits from using legumes instead of buying commercial fertilizer.
So let's go a little bit into what those benefits are. We've talked on the show in the past about the natural biological interactions that legumes have with soil microbes to help to capture the nitrogen and convert it into plant available nitrogen in the soil. Can you give us a little bit more information about how they can select the right seed for their pasture field?
Yes, there are two legumes that are major legumes. One is white clover, and the other one is red clover. When working with toxic tall fescue, I would recommend a combination of both white and red clover. White clover is going to be the longest lived component, but red clover actually carries the antidote for the toxin that is in tall fescue, or the toxic type tall fescue. So that's why in those wild type Kentucky 31, we often call it fescues, I would encourage red clover along with the white clover because of that antitoxin effect. When seeding, I would recommend a combination of the two, and I recommend 1 to 2 pounds of white clover and 4 to 8 pounds of red clover. And that upper end is maybe a little extravagant, but that's an old classic recommend for a new seeding.
And Dr. Rayburn, this is pounds per acre, correct?
Correct, exactly. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your pointing that out.
Not a problem. Hey, will you walk us through the science behind frost seeding, why it's called frost seeding, why it's successful, and why those legumes are such a good complement to that method?
Okay. Frost seeding is just what it says. We'd like to be doing this when the night temperatures are down in the low 20s. That causes the surface of the soil to freeze, and you'll get these ice crystals that stick up out of the soil, and that's what incorporates the seed into the soil. And that's what we're wanting, is to broadcast those seeds out, get that frost action that's incorporating the seed in just to the top quarter inch of the soil, because that's where the seed needs to be to germinate.
And you don't want to use old seed. You want to use fresh seed.
Yes, we do need new seed. Much of the seed that we buy nowadays is actually coated seed, and that's actually good technology because that coated seed also has been impregnated with the bacteria that the clover needs to get into its roots to fix the nitrogen. It's that combination of the bacteria inside the clover root making a nodule. If you ever dig up a clover plant, you'll see these little round bumps. Those are the nodules. And if you cut one open and it's pink inside, that tells you it's a active functional nodule. If it's green inside, it's probably not a functioning nodule.
And a couple things will lead to it being a non-functional nodule. From my experience from working with producers, I know a lot of times, even though clovers and legumes will fix the nitrogen and allow the grasses to utilize that nitrogen as well. If you are fertilizing on top of legumes, the legumes just don't want to work. Is that a correct way to look at it?
Exactly. Legumes are smart. Why take all that energy to fix nitrogen? Because it is a very energy expensive activity. If the legume can pull the nitrogen out of the soil, it's not going to expend energy fixing nitrogen.
I got a funny story for you, Dr. Rayburn. There was a producer, very, very hardworking woman, wanted to incorporate red clover into her pasture. And she's like, Dan, I've read up on the frost seeding method. I make sure that I have some bare ground so I have good seed to soil contact. She's like, I drill it in to the specified amount. I overseed to that 2 to 4 pounds per acre that you were talking about. And then as it warms up, I give it a good bout of fertilizer, just to really help out that legume so it'll get established. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Rayburn, but I think the problem was once we add external nitrogen to a grass legume mix, the grasses really just grab up that nitrogen. And I think what was happening was the legumes were getting out competed.
You are right on the ball, Dan. We've killed more clover seedlings by putting nitrogen on after a frost seeding than any other way. To properly fertilize legumes, we need to get that lime and any needed phosphorus and potassium out the previous fall. And a good way to do it is if you need phosphorus, use DAP in the August. That's going to give you some nitrogen to give you some fall pasture, but then we'll have that phosphorus in the soil for the spring for those clover seeds, and we don't need any nitrogen. We want to keep the nitrogen away from a new seeding of legume.
Yeah, and I think another mistake is, we like to think of frost seeding as something to do to increase our pasture and increase productivity, but a lot of times you're putting it on areas that are a little bit more bare, because you have to have that bare soil for that good seed to soil contact. But I think people just get overzealous and then graze it too early. What would your recommendation be for how long you should keep a frost seeded pasture field of mixed grasses and legumes? Keep the animals off of that until it establishes.
Let it come up in the spring, 8 to 10 inches tall, and then graze it down. Now, in doing that, I know that you can have some damage to the seedlings. For example, a cow steps on some seedlings and is going to kill some of those seedlings. But on the other hand, we do need to control that grass canopy so that those seedlings have sunlight. And from my experience, if those seedlings, okay, I'm going to use orchard grass as the example. The same would apply to tall fescue, but look at where does that lowest leaf come off of the orchard grass or fescue plant. If you don't graze, if you just graze down to, it's about 2 to 3 inches, that's going to get most of that leaf area off. But if you look at your clover seedlings in the early spring, those clover seedlings are going to be down below that bottom leaf. And as long as I don't let the cattle graze down into those clover seedlings, I think they're going to be okay. But by taking off that top level of grass leaf, now I've provided sunlight to those seedlings, which is something they really need just as much as the grass does.
I see. That's an excellent point. So when working with the grass legume mixture, even that first year of seeding, it's okay to graze it. I mean, it sounds like it's beneficial to graze it because it does open up that canopy and allow the sunlight to penetrate, and you'll get a good legume establishment there.
Right.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and in this situation, we're dealing with a mature grass plant that's already there to be competitive with it. My recommendation, if I had gone out into a hayfield and killed the sod and was completely renovating the site, my recommendation would be quite different. Because in that site where everything's starting off fresh, new grass seedlings are the same age as the legume seed, then yes, now we need to be much more careful to stay off that site until we have good establishment.
Okay, yeah, and very good advice, and I understand now. These are two completely different scenarios where one you have to allow that legume to compete with the grass, and just like I guess just like an example earlier when we talked about using nitrogen, the grass is just hardier and more aggressive and can easily shade out that legume.
Right, right. Dan, could I use an analogy? It's like feeding a big steer and a little steer in the same feed trough. If they don't have enough space, the big steer is going to get all the food, and the little steer is going to run off to the side. The same applies to the plants. If I have a mature fescue plant there, one that's been around for a year or two versus that little clover seedling that I just got out there this spring.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny how that just translates from one step to the next. But you have mentioned a couple grasses. You talked about tall fescue, you talked about orchard grass. When we are doing this frost seeding method, are there grasses that will work better than others?
Well, when we're frost seeding, it's mainly the legumes that work well because they're that little small spherical hard seed. If I were to frost seed a grass, about the only one I would expect to really do well would be Timothy, because it has a seed very similar to a clover seed. When you get into other plants like orchard grass and fescue, they tend to be much more fluffy. And I'm not going to say they can't be frost seeded, but I'm not sure I'd spend my money for it. I think those are going to do a lot better with a no-till drill.
I see. So the larger the seed, the better. But I mean, maybe I said that wrong. I was thinking when frost seeding red clover, for instance, or white clover, is there a type of grass that you're seeding into that works better for that legume frost seeding method?
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm sorry, I misinterpreted your
it's okay.
question.
I might have said it wrong, but you did make a good point about the Timothy. That larger seed does typically work better in this method. That makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah. Okay. The three big grasses that I know of that you have up in your neck of the woods would be orchard grass, tall fescue, and I've seen a lot of smooth brome grass up there on the ridges. The key is to have been able to graze that off in the fall or during the winter, because we do need that bare space. Smooth brome grass, again, if it's been grazed off, there'll be a lot of bare ground in there during the winter. Orchard grass, of course, is a clump grass, and so if you don't have bluegrass around the base of it, you're going to have a lot of bare space. Fescue, it depends on how you've been managing it. One of the good things to do with fescue, if you want to do a frost seeding, is actually to stockpile in the late summer. So this would be late July, early to mid-August. Set that fescue aside so that it accumulates a lot of feed, which is good in terms of fall and winter grazing. But you actually can open up the fescue canopy by getting that tall canopy that causes a lot of shading down below. And that actually helps open up the ground at the bottom. So you have that frost action. I'll give you an example, and this is an extreme example. Not that I am recommending it that much, but back when I was working on my PhD, I stockpiled tall fescue from middle to the end of June with 100 pounds of nitrogen on it in June. And the end result was I had 50% bare ground in December because I had caused that shading and tiller death in the tall fescue, which if you're dealing with toxic tall fescue, this isn't all bad. because it gives me that good stand of clover, which helps take care of the toxic effects of the tall fescue. So just sharing that as an example of an extreme case, not that I'm recommending it.
Well, but that does make sense. And even, when we talk about lawns, and I know a lot of times that in pasture fields, we always talk about maybe leaving a higher residual going into winter, leaving it alone so that the roots in that perennial plant have a nice reserve for the winter. But, in a lawn situation, a lot of times, if you leave it too long, it will collapse down and start smothering out itself. So I think that's kind of what was going on in this case.
Yes, and you're bringing up a good example with the lawn because the lawn is the other extreme of this example that I gave. If I fertilize with nitrogen in the fall and I keep that lawn mowed every week, but to a reasonable residual height, usually 3 to 4 inch residual height, that's what gives me all those tillers. And it also is the time that canopy develops tillers for next year. So, we've just hit on the two extremes. Now, the Goldilocks zone is in that early to mid-August period of deferral and fertilization. But it's a wide spectrum. And understanding and knowing that spectrum allows the individual to manage for what they want. Do they want that open stand, like I described, 50% bare ground, or do we want something that looks like a lawn? And it's all a matter of timing and intensity of both the fertilizer and the grazing management.
And in this show, we're specifically discussing the benefits of using legume, especially due to the high nitrogen prices right now.
That's right.
Fertilizer is just an extremely expensive thing. It's tripled in price in the past couple months.
Ooh, I haven't priced it recently.
Yeah, that fire in North Carolina did not do good things.
Like it might have come down a little bit, but at one point it was triple the cost. And utilizing that legume is just a great way to. I like how you were bringing up the toxicosis effect of Kentucky 31, the tall fescue. A lot of times that plant is most toxic when we'll say mid-spring when it's going to seed.
Right.
And a lot of times people want to graze really quickly and they will put that nitrogen on, but from the literature, it's been linked to promote maybe a higher level of toxin because that grass is just getting that nitrogen and going reproductive so quickly.
That is correct. Yes.
And having that companion legume in that kind of situation would really allow for lower toxin levels, possibly even, you said, neutralization effects due to some of the compounds found in the red clover to avoid such a thing and have a good grazing pasture.
Right. We do not want to waste the dollars buying nitrogen to put on a pasture. What money we put into pasture should be invested in lime, phosphorus, and if needed, potassium. And quite often pastures don't need potassium, but we want to double check and make sure that that's the case, and that's why we soil test. If we invest our money in lime, phosphorus, and potassium, and then the clover seed, and I did fail to mention, you want to buy a stated variety type of clover. These would be white clovers like Will, white clover, Liberty, Patriot. Those are some really top quality white clovers. Then named varieties of red clover are Cinnamon Plus and Kenlin. And there's some other ones out there that we can get you names for. But these are high quality seed from reputable breeders. It's kind of like, do I buy a good bull or do I just go down to the stockyard and buy whatever bull runs through the pen? I think we should be buying good bulls, and I think we should be buying good clover seed. White clover seed might look expensive. It's going to be at least $5 to $6 a pound, and it might be a little bit more this year. But if you think about it, I only need 2 pounds of white clover seed out there. And if I do 4 pounds of red clover seed, that's going to be somewhere around $3 a pound. So that's 12. I've got $20 worth of seed out there, right? More or less. But it's going to give the yield equivalent, on average, of 150 pounds of N. So that $20 of seed, if I manage it properly and give it the right pH and phosphorus and potassium, ends up being worth somewhere between $75 and $150 an acre.
Well, and at $1 a pound of nitrogen, I mean, it's almost equivalent, you know?
That's the $150 range, yes.
Yeah.
And that's just 1 year. And these legumes the white clover is going to be there if you manage it well, basically forever. The red clover will be there for 2 to 3 years. So you multiply that 150 by either 2 or 3 to look at the economic benefit of that $20. I've been in West Virginia for 30 years now, and I run my own farm here in Preston County. And I think we waste more money on nitrogen than just about any other input if I'm willing to learn to manage the clover as the alternative. Consistently with proper grazing management, and I'm speaking now on hayfields, but I do graze the aftermath. So all my hayfields, I only take 1 cut of hay off, and then they're grazed in the summer and the fall as needed, as available. Then the other thing I throw in there is all the hay is fed back on the hayfield. And doing that, I've maintained soil fertility in the optimum zone, and I'm making 2 tons or more hay, first cut hay. This year with the nice rain, we made closer to 3 tons of hay in the first cut hay. But I'd say on average 2 tons of hay first cut, plus all the aftermath and fall grazing. And all of that's done just by recycling the nutrients from the hay and the nitrogen fixed by the clover. It can be done if one wants to bother learning how to manage the legumes. And the manure. Got to give a lot of credit for the manure. I would like to invite everybody out to the Appalachian Grazing Conference. You can check us out on the web. The conference is being held in Morgantown on the 10th, 11th, and 12th of March. The 10th will be a tour to 2 farms down in Harrison County. The educational meetings will be on Friday, the 11th of March, and Saturday, the 12th of March. So anybody that can come to that, we'd really like to see you there and enjoy meeting with you.
All right, Dr. Rayburn, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks a lot.
A lot of what we've talked about today has revolved around good pasture management. We talked about wasting money and how nitrogen is a waste of money. But what's not a waste of money is the Appalachian Grazing Conference. There's a lot of good programs to talk about how you can build your soil health, how you can control weeds, how you can develop a forage management plan that's specific to your farm. And so I do want to encourage all of our listeners who are hopefully, if they're cattle farmers, are also grass farmers. I want to encourage all our grass farmers to look into the Appalachian Grazing Conference. There is a lot of great information that you can take home. And depending on where you live, there may also be scholarship available to you. And I do hope that you will look into that. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you next week. Do you have questions about the COVID-19 vaccination? Do you want to know who can get it, where to get it, or do you have general questions about COVID-19 vaccines? Vaccinate.wv.gov has the info you are looking for. You can also call the West Virginia COVID-19 Vaccine Info Line to talk to a representative and find out more at 1-833-734-0965. Again, that's vaccinate.wv.gov or 1-833-734-0965 to get your COVID-19 vaccination questions answered. This message was brought to you by the WVU Extension Service. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.